Hello dear wanderers of myth and legend. Welcome back to Emerald Dreams, where the ancient stories of Ireland come alive in the quiet hours, where the mists of time part to reveal tales that have echoed through countless generations. Tonight, I invite you to settle into comfort, to let the cares of the modern world drift away like morning fog over the Irish countryside, as we journey together into one of the most magnificent epics ever told on the shores of the Emerald Isle. What we explore tonight is not merely a story. It is the heartbeat of Irish mythology, the central pillar upon which the Ulster cycle stands. The Táin Bó Cúailnge, known in English as the Cattle Raid of Cooley, is often called the Irish Iliad, though perhaps that comparison does it a disservice, for this tale belongs wholly to Ireland, sprung from the same soil that nurtured oak and ash, carved by the same waters that shaped the rivers and lakes of this mystical land. Picture, if you will, ancient Ireland in the 1st century, the time when the events of this tale are traditionally set, though the stories themselves were not written down until much later, preserved first through oral tradition, and then in manuscripts from the 12th century onward. This is a world where heroes stride across the landscape like giants, where the boundaries between the mortal realm and the otherworld are gossamer thin, easily crossed by those with the knowledge or the courage. This is a time when cattle represent not merely livestock but wealth itself, when a great bull could be worth more than territories, when kingdoms might go to war over the possession of a single magnificent beast. The provinces of Ireland stand distinct and proud. In the west lies Connaught, ruled from the great fortress of Cruachan by Queen Medb, a woman whose name means she who intoxicates, a sovereign as fierce as any warrior, as cunning as any druid. To the north stretches Ulster, ancient and powerful, its warriors the most renowned in all of Ireland, protected by King Conchobar mac Nessa and defended by the greatest hero the island has ever known. Between these two powers, tension simmers like a pot over a flame, waiting only for the right spark to boil over into open conflict. And that spark, that catalyst for war and wonder, would come not from insult or territorial dispute, but from something far more primal, the clash of pride between a husband and wife, the desire for equality, the refusal to be deemed lesser in any regard. From pillow talk in the royal chambers of Cruachan would spring a conflict that would test the very foundations of Ulster, that would see one young warrior stand alone against the armies of all Ireland, that would create legends sung around firesides for millennia to come. So pull your blankets close, dim the lights, and let your mind wander back across the centuries. Feel the mist on your face, smell the peat smoke rising from distant hearths, hear the distant call of a raven circling overhead. The story begins, as so many great tales do, with the most ordinary of circumstances that spiral into the extraordinary. The seeds of conflict, a quarrel between sovereigns. In the great hall of Cruachan, where the torches cast dancing shadows upon walls hung with shields and spears, where the scent of mead and roasted meat mingled in the warm air, Queen Medb lay beside her husband, King Ailill mac Mata. It was a quiet evening, the kind where thoughts turn inward and tongues loosen with wine. What began as idle conversation would become the opening notes of an epic symphony of war. Ailill, perhaps unwisely, made a remark that many a husband has made and lived to regret. He suggested, in that tone men sometimes use when they believe themselves clever, that Medb's fortunes had improved considerably since their marriage, that she had done well for herself by taking him as a husband, that his wealth and power had elevated her station. Now, you must understand who Medb was to comprehend why these words landed like a slap. She was the daughter of Eochu Feidlech, the High King of Ireland himself. She had held the throne of Connaught before Ailill, and would hold it after him if she chose. More than this, she was, by many accounts, a sovereignty goddess made flesh, the personification of the land itself, the one who could grant or withdraw the right to rule. She was known throughout Ireland for her beauty that could steal away 2/3 of a man's valour with a single glance, for her strength that matched any warrior, for her mind that could outthink the cleverest druids. Maev's eyes, we can imagine, grew cold as mountain lakes in winter. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the edge of a well-honed blade. She suggested, with dangerous politeness, that perhaps they should enumerate their possessions, count up their wealth piece by piece, and see exactly who had benefited from their union. And so began the great reckoning. Servants were summoned, scribes called forth with their tallying sticks. Through the night they counted. Maeve had gold ornaments and jeweled brooches in abundance, precious metals worked by the finest craftsmen. Ailill matched her piece for piece. She had land, rich and fertile, stretching across Connaught. He had inherited equally fine territories. She had warriors pledged to her service, brave men who would follow her into any battle. He commanded his own loyal forces. Back and forth they went, through silver cups and bronze cauldrons, through fine linens and imported silks, through herds of cattle and flocks of sheep. For every possession Maeve claimed, Ailill could counter with something of equal value. They were matched in wealth, equal in status, neither able to claim superiority over the other, until they came to the cattle. Among Ailill's herds grazed a bull of such magnificence that its mere presence elevated him above his wife. Fin Benak, the white-horned one, also called the White Bull of Connaught. This was no ordinary animal. Born of magic, as all truly exceptional things in Ireland seemed to be, Fin Benak was a creature of power and prestige. His coat shone white as new-fallen snow, his horns curved like the crescent moon, his frame massive and powerful. Most critically, he was renowned throughout all of Ireland as the most fertile bull in the land, capable of siring offspring that would themselves become the foundation of great herds. The bull had originally been born into Maeve's own herds, but being a beast of pride and possessing, like all magical creatures, the capacity for thought and speech, Fin Benak had decided it was beneath his dignity to be owned by a woman. He had, quite deliberately, crossed over to Ailill's herds instead, thereby tipping the scales of wealth in favor of the king. Maeve said nothing immediately, but those who knew her could read the set of her jaw, the straightness of her spine, the particular stillness that came over her when her mind was working at its sharpest. She dismissed the servants with a wave of her hand. When she and Ailill were alone once more, she asked a simple question. Is there, anywhere in Ireland, a bull that could rival the Fin Benak? Ailill, perhaps sensing he had won the argument, magnanimously admitted that yes, there was one. In Ulster, in the peninsula of Cooley, in the herds of a chieftain named Dair Mac Fiachna, there grazed a bull called Don Cúailnge, the Brown Bull of Cooley. By all accounts, this beast was Fin Benak's only equal in all of Ireland. Some said he was even superior, for Don Cúailnge possessed not only size and fertility, but also a certain fierce nobility, a wildness that marked him as something more than a mere animal. Maeve's eyes lit with determination. Then I shall have him, she declared. And when Don Cúailnge walks among my herds, you and I shall be equal once more, husband. Not one piece of gold, not one parcel of land, not one magnificent bull shall distinguish your wealth from mine. But before we continue with how Maeve sought to obtain this legendary creature, we must understand the origins of these two magnificent bulls, for their story stretches back through transformations and conflicts that spanned lifetimes, a tale within the tale that illuminates the magic woven throughout Irish mythology. The tale of two bulls, origins in otherworldly conflict. Long before they were bulls, before they possessed the forms that would make them objects of desire for kings and queens, they were men, or so the ancient tales tell us. The story of their origins comes to us as a foretale, one of those explanatory stories meant to give deeper meaning to the main narrative. According to this tradition, they were swineherds, servants to the gods of the Tuatha De Danann, those divine beings who ruled Ireland before the coming of mortals, who retreated into the hollow hills and the side mounds when humanity claimed the surface world. Their names were Freach and Rucht, and they tended the pigs of two rival kings of the side. Freach served Bob Durg, king of the Munster side, while Rucht was swineherd to Ochel Arkney, king of the Connaught side. For a time, they were friends, or at least professional rivals who respected each other's skill. They would meet at the boundaries between their masters' territories and share news, compare the quality of their herds, perhaps share a skin of ale and speak of other things. But as with so many friendships, pride crept in. A casual boast became a serious claim. A jest turned into an insult. Their rivalry, at first good-natured, grew bitter. Each claimed his pigs were finer, his master more generous, his own skills superior. Words led to challenges, and challenges to something far stranger. For these were no ordinary swineherds, you see. According to the tales, they possessed magic, the ability to change their shapes, to take on new forms. And in their anger and pride, they began a contest that would last not years but lifetimes, transforming again and again, fighting in each new form until one proved victorious. The sequence of their transformations varies somewhat in different versions, but the pattern remains consistent. They became creatures of increasing power and ferocity. First, according to most tellings, they became ravens, black-winged and fierce, circling each other in the sky above Ireland. They fought in the air, talon against talon, beak against beak, neither gaining advantage. Then they became water beasts, serpentine creatures of lake and river, coiling through the depths. They became stags with antlers that could gore a warrior through. Dragons breathing fire. Warriors in human form. Phantoms of mist and shadow. Through transformation after transformation they continued, driven by pride and ancient rivalry, neither willing to concede defeat. Finally, exhausted by what must have been centuries of conflict across multiple forms, they took the shapes of water worms, tiny creatures that could barely harm each other. In this reduced state, the tales suggest something changed. Rucht, weary perhaps beyond measure, found himself in Connaught, where he advised a young woman named Maeve on matters of sovereignty, counselling her to marry Ailill mac Mata. Having given this counsel, Rucht was swallowed by one of Ailill's cows and was reborn from her as Fin Benach, the White Bull. Freach, following his rival even across death and rebirth, arranged to be swallowed by a cow in Ulster and was born as Dom Cúailnge, the Brown Bull of Cooley. Even as bulls, the stories tell us, they retained something of their former selves, an understanding beyond that of ordinary animals, the capacity to comprehend human speech, and most importantly, that ancient, undying hatred for each other. Their conflict, which had begun over something as trivial as whose pigs were finer, had transformed them into creatures of legend, and their fate was now intertwined with the fate of nations. This is the mystical origin of the two bulls as preserved in the ancient foretales, the hidden history that helps explain why these creatures were more than ordinary animals. To the people of Ireland in that age, they were simply magnificent beasts, the finest in the land. But the tradition held that fate had woven their destinies with invisible threads, ensuring that these ancient rivals would meet again in one final, devastating conflict. And so we return to Queen Medb, lying sleepless in her chamber, her mind working through possibilities and plans, determined to possess the Brown Bull of Cooley and restore the balance of wealth between herself and her husband, all unknowing of the deeper currents of destiny she was about to set in motion. The hero who would stand alone. Before we follow Maeve on her quest for the bull, we must turn our attention to Ulster and the hero who would ultimately stand between the Queen and her desires. For no tale of the Táin would be complete without understanding Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster, the greatest warrior Ireland has ever known, the young man who would face impossible odds with nothing but his skill, his courage, and a determination that bordered on the supernatural. His birth was surrounded by mystery, as befits a hero of his stature. The tales preserved in different manuscripts offer varying accounts of his origins. Some say his mother was Dech Tinne, sister to King Concobar mac Nessa of Ulster and his charioteer. Others claim she was the king's daughter. These variations in genealogy are not unusual in Irish mythology, where family relationships often shift between different versions of the same story. But all the surviving accounts agree on one crucial point. His father was no mortal man. Lough of the Long Arm, the god of light and crafts, the champion of the Tuatha de Danann, is named as his divine parent in the tradition. The exact circumstances of his conception vary in the telling. Some accounts involve supernatural visitations, others speak of more mysterious means, but the result was a child born into the mortal world who carried the blood of gods in his veins. The boy was named Setanta at his birth, and from the earliest age, he displayed abilities that marked him as different from other children. He was stronger, faster, more coordinated. While other boys his age were learning to walk steadily, Setanta was running. While they fumbled with toys, he was handling weapons with the ease of a trained warrior. His foster parents knew they had no ordinary child in their care. The story of how he gained the name by which history would remember him has been told and retold around countless fires. It happened when he was still a child, perhaps 7 summers old, already showing such promise that King Concobar took special interest in his development. One evening, Cúlainn the smith, a man renowned throughout Ulster for his metalwork, invited the king to a feast. It was a great honor, for Cúlainn was a master craftsman whose blades never dulled, whose shields never cracked. As Concobar made ready to depart for Cúlainn's dwelling, he passed by the playing fields of Emain Mocha, Ulster's royal seat, where the boys of the kingdom's noble families trained in hurling and martial skills. There, the king saw young Setanta playing against all the other boys at once. Not with them, but against them. One small child facing dozens of others, and winning. He moved with such speed and grace that the other children couldn't touch him, while he tagged them out one by one. Impressed by this display, Concobar invited the boy to join him at the feast. Setanta, focused on his game, asked if he might finish the match first and then follow the king. Concobar agreed and departed, but in the excitement of arrival and the beginning of the feast, he forgot to mention to Cúlainn that another guest would be arriving. Now, Cúlainn lived in a remote dwelling, his forge set apart from the settlements because of the noise and heat of his work. He kept no guards, no warriors to protect his home and his precious metalwork. Instead, he relied on a single guardian, a massive hound, a beast of such size and ferocity that it was said to be worth 100 warriors. This dog was more wolf than domestic animal, bred for battle, trained to kill. When Cúlainn sealed his gates for the night, he loosed the hound, and nothing living that valued its life would dare approach his dwelling in darkness. This is precisely what the smith did after Concobar and his retinue arrived, unaware that a small boy was still making his way along the road toward the feast. Setanta, his game finished, set out on foot for Cúlainn's house. He carried with him only his hurling stick and ball, entertaining himself as boys do, striking the ball ahead of him and running to catch it, over and over. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds, but the boy knew the way and feared nothing in the night. He was perhaps 100 paces from Cúlainn's gate when he heard it, a sound to freeze the blood, a deep growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. Then he saw it, a shape darker than the darkness, eyes gleaming in what little light there was. The hound had caught his scent. What happened next has been told in different ways across the generations, the details varying with each bard's telling, but the outcome is always the same. The accounts speak of the boy defending himself with whatever he had at hand, his hurling stick and ball being the weapons of a child at play. Some versions say he struck the hound with the ball, driving it down the beast's throat. Others describe him seizing the animal and dashing it against stone, or even strangling it with his bare hands, a feat that would speak to supernatural strength flowing from his divine heritage. However the combat unfolded, when Cúlainn and his guests rushed out with torches and weapons, Drawn by the sounds of the struggle, they found young Setanta standing unharmed, though splattered with blood, and the great hound lying dead at his feet. Concobar was relieved, embracing the boy and praising his survival. But Cúlainn looked at his dead guardian and wept. That hound had been his protection, his companion, the work of years of breeding and training. No gold could replace it, no amount of metalwork compensate for its loss. Setanta, though he had acted only in self-defense, felt the smith's grief. With a wisdom beyond his years, the boy spoke up. "Cúlainn," he said, "forgive me. I did not wish to slay your hound, but it gave me no choice. But hear my offer. If there is in all of Ireland a pup with the potential to replace your guardian, I will find it and train it myself. And until that new hound is grown and able to guard your home, I will serve in its place. I will be your hound, Cúlainn." The smith was moved by this offer, and the king was proud of the boy's honor. Cathbad the druid, Concobar's chief advisor, a man who could read the threads of fate, spoke up then. "From this day forward," the druid proclaimed, "your name shall be Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Cúlainn. This name shall echo through the ages, and men will speak it with respect and fear." And so the boy became Cú Chulainn, and he kept his promise, guarding Cúlainn's home until a new hound was trained. By then, the name had stuck, and Setanta was no more. The Hound of Ulster had been born. But names and childhood tales, impressive as they are, do not make a hero. For that, Cú Chulainn needed training, needed to be forged in the fires of discipline and skill until he became the warrior destined to stand alone against armies. And for this training, he would travel far from Ulster's shores, to a place of mist and shadow, to learn from a teacher unlike any other. The training of a champion, journey to the shadow lands. As Cú Chulainn grew from childhood into youth, his prowess continued to astound those around him. He excelled in all the martial arts practiced by Ulster's warriors, the sword, the spear, the javelin. He could ride horses that others couldn't mount, could throw further, strike harder, move faster than any of his contemporaries. Yet Concobar and the other nobles knew that raw talent, however prodigious, was not enough. He needed refinement, discipline, techniques that would transform natural ability into perfect skill. But there was another reason the men of Ulster sought to send him away for training. Cú Chulainn had grown into a young man of such beauty and charm that the wives and daughters of Ulster's warriors were constantly drawn to him. It seemed that every woman who saw him fell at least a little in love, and this was causing tension in the kingdom. The nobles decided he needed a wife of his own, and they searched throughout Ulster for a suitable match. The young man's eye fell upon Emma, daughter of Folklore monarch, a woman renowned for her beauty, wisdom, and skill with needle and loom. She was accomplished in all the arts a noble woman should possess, but more than this, she had a quick wit and sharp tongue that matched Cú Chulainn's own cleverness. When he wooed her, they spoke in riddles and poetic codes that baffled those listening, understanding each other perfectly while mystifying everyone else. It seemed a perfect match, but Folklore monarch had other plans for his daughter. He saw in this young warrior, however talented, a troublesome son-in-law who would likely drag Emma into dangerous adventures. Folklore wanted a steadier match, preferably Lugaid mac Nua, King of Munster, a man of wealth and established power. Unable to simply refuse the Hound of Ulster, who was nephew to his king, Folklore devised a subtle plan. He suggested, with apparent concern for Cú Chulainn's development, that before marriage the young man should complete his training with the greatest warrior teacher in all the world, Scatchach of Alba, who lived on the Isle of Skye in what we now call Scotland. Folklore's secret hope, of course, was that Cú Chulainn would die in the attempt. The journey to Scatchach was famously perilous, and even those who reached her often perished in training. But the young warrior, eager to prove himself worthy of Emma and genuinely desiring to learn all he could of martial arts, accepted the challenge enthusiastically. He set out across the sea with several companions, including a warrior named Ferdia mac Domain, who would become his closest friend. The journey to Scatchac's domain was filled with trials and obstacles, supernatural challenges designed to test the mettle of any who sought the warrior woman's instruction. They faced enchanted forests where paths shifted and changed, rivers that ran uphill and played tricks with time, creatures of the otherworld who offered false guidance. When at last they reached the Bridge of Leaps, the final obstacle before Scatchac's fortress of Dun Scaith, the Fortress of Shadows, they found it guarded by magic. This bridge would throw back any who tried to cross it, hurling them back to the shore no matter how skilled the warrior. 3 times Cú Chulainn tried to cross, and 3 times the bridge flung him backwards. But on the 3rd attempt, something changed. Perhaps it was his divine heritage asserting itself, or perhaps simply his absolute refusal to accept defeat. He performed what became known as the Salmon Leap, a technique he would later use in battle, a supernatural jump that carried him past the bridge's defenses in a single bound, landing him at Scatchac's gates. The warrior woman was impressed. She appeared at her fortress walls, a figure of fierce beauty and undeniable power, and accepted him as a student. From that moment, Cú Chulainn's true training began. Scatchac was no ordinary teacher. Known as the Shadowy One, she possessed knowledge of martial techniques that others could only dream of. She taught her students not just to fight but to fight with artistry, to turn combat into a deadly dance where each movement flowed into the next with perfect precision. Under her instruction, Cú Chulainn learned the secrets of underwater combat, useful for fighting in rivers and fords. He mastered pole vaulting techniques that allowed him to scale walls and leap over enemy lines. He learned the art of chariot fighting, how to balance on the pole between racing horses while wielding weapons. She taught him techniques of such complexity they had names like Apple Feet and Thunder Feet, maneuvers that combined acrobatics with lethal strikes. His training lasted a year and a day by some accounts, 7 years by others. The tales differ on this point, as they often do with time spent in places touched by the other world. Perhaps in such places, time itself flows differently, bending to laws we don't fully understand. Throughout this period, however long it truly was, Cú Chulainn and Ferdia became more than friends. They were foster brothers, a bond in Irish society that was considered as strong as blood kinship, perhaps stronger. They trained together, ate together, and according to the customs of that time, often shared sleeping quarters as close companions did, building a relationship that would later add terrible tragedy to the Táin's narrative. But the most important gift Scatchac gave Cú Chulainn was a weapon and the knowledge of how to use it. This was the Gay Bulgar, the belly spear, the spear of mortal pain, a weapon of such terrible power that Scatchac taught only Cú Chulainn its use. The Gay Bulgar had been crafted from the bone of a sea monster called the Curruid, which had fought with another beast called the Coinchen in the depths of the ocean. The bone had been found on the shore of a distant sea, and had passed through several hands before coming to Scatchac. She had shaped it into a spear of unique and terrifying design. The weapon possessed a special quality. When it entered a body, it would explode into multiple barbs, some tellings say 30, others describe them differently, that filled every joint of the victim, making removal impossible without cutting the person apart. It guaranteed death to anyone it struck, but the technique for using it was equally unique. It had to be cast not from the hand but from the foot, kicked forward in a specific motion that Scatchac revealed to no other student. In some versions of the tale, Scatchac gave the weapon directly to Cú Chulainn. In others, she gave it to her sister and rival, Aoife, from whom Cú Chulainn took it after defeating her in single combat. The details vary, but the result is the same. The Hound of Ulster returned from his training with skills and a weapon that made him perhaps the most dangerous warrior alive. As his training drew to a close, Scatchac, who possessed the gift of prophecy like many who dwell close to the otherworld, saw visions of his future. She told him that he would earn everlasting fame, that his name would echo through the ages, that songs would be sung of his deeds when the mountains themselves had worn away to dust. But she also saw darkness. She prophesied that his life would be short, that fame and longevity were two gifts the gods rarely granted together, and that he must choose between them. Cú Chulainn, with the absolute certainty of youth, chose glory without hesitation. Better a short life blazing with heroic deeds than a long life of comfortable obscurity. It was a choice many heroes before and since have made, and one he would never have cause to regret, even in his darkest hours. Thus trained, armed with the gay Bulgar, bound by friendship to Ferdia, and marked by fate for both greatness and tragedy, Cú Chulainn returned to Ireland. He stormed Folklore's fortress, killed 24 of the chieftain's men in single combat, and claimed Emma as his bride. Folklore himself fell from the ramparts in the chaos, dying from the fall. The wedding was held at Emain Mocha with great ceremony, and it seemed that Cú Chulainn's story would be one of triumph and happiness. But the threads of fate were weaving a darker pattern. Even as he celebrated with his new bride, even as Ulster's nobles toasted his return and his king honoured him with gifts, forces were moving in the west. Queen Medb had sent her messengers to Ulster with an offer for Dair mac Fiachna, and the wheels of war were beginning to turn. At 17 years old, possessing skills honed by the greatest warrior teacher in the world, armed with a weapon of legendary power, bound by love and duty to Ulster, Cú Chulainn stood on the threshold of the greatest test any warrior had ever faced. He did not know it yet, but soon he would stand alone against the armies of Ireland, and his name would be written in blood and glory across the pages of mythology. The curse that crippled warriors, Mocha's revenge. Before we follow Queen Medb's armies as they marched toward Ulster, we must understand the great vulnerability that made Ulster ripe for invasion, the supernatural affliction that would ensure Cú Chulainn stood alone. For without understanding the curse of Mocha, we cannot comprehend how one young warrior came to face impossible odds. The story begins with a man named Cruinniuc mac Agnamain, a wealthy farmer who lived alone in a remote part of Ulster. His wife had died some time before, and he mourned her passing in the quiet way of men who work the land, finding solace in routine and the rhythms of the seasons. His house was well kept, his herds thriving, but it was a lonely existence, empty of human warmth and companionship. One day, without warning or explanation, a woman appeared at his door. She was tall and beautiful, moving with a grace that suggested she was more than she appeared. Without speaking a word, she walked into Cruinniuc's house and began organizing his household. She directed the servants with authority, prepared food with skill, and brought order to things he hadn't even realized were in disarray. That night, still without having spoken, she came to his bed. Cruinniuc, whether through loneliness, desire, or some enchantment he didn't comprehend, accepted her presence. They became husband and wife without ceremony or explanation, living together in a partnership that brought prosperity to everything they touched. The herds grew larger, the harvests more bountiful. Cruinniuc's wealth increased beyond anything he had known before. The woman's name was Mocha, though Cruinniuc didn't learn this at first. She was one of the great goddesses of Ireland, associated with sovereignty, horses, and warfare. Why she chose to live as a mortal woman with this farmer, the tales don't fully explain. Perhaps she was testing something, or hiding from otherworldly enemies, or simply curious about mortal life. The gods of Ireland were known to walk among humans when the mood took them. Time passed, and Mocha became pregnant with Cruinniuc's child. She grew heavy with the pregnancy, her time of delivery approaching, but still she managed the household and helped with the work of the farm. Her strength, even in this condition, was remarkable, more than any normal woman could possess. One day, Cruinniuc prepared to attend the Great Assembly of Ulster, a gathering where the king and his nobles met to discuss matters of state, where warriors competed in games and races, where the wealth and power of Ulster was displayed for all to see. Mocha, sensing danger, spoke to him then, perhaps the first words she had said since arriving at his door. "Do not go," she warned him. "Or if you must go, say nothing of me to anyone. Speak not of your wife, do not mention my name, do not boast of anything concerning me. If you do, our union will end, and you will regret breaking your silence until the last of your days." Cruinniuc promised. He swore he would be careful, would drink moderately, would keep his tongue behind his teeth. He set out for the assembly with every intention of keeping his word. But men at gatherings, surrounded by other men, with ale flowing and competitions unfolding, are prone to boasting. The festival atmosphere, the excitement of the races, the back and forth of warriors bragging about their lords and their provinces, all of it conspired against Cruinniuc's good intentions. King Concobar had a pair of horses racing that day, magnificent beasts that were the fastest in Ulster. They won their race handily, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Men shouted that nothing in Ireland could match the king's horses, that Ulster possessed the swiftest steeds in all the world. Cruinniuc, his judgment clouded by pride and ale, couldn't help himself. "My wife could run faster than those horses," he declared loudly enough for those around him to hear. The words spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Soon enough, they reached King Concobar's ears. The king, his pride stung and curious about this claim, demanded that Cruinniuc's wife be brought to the assembly to prove the boast. Cruinniuc, sobering quickly and realizing his terrible mistake, protested. He explained that his wife was pregnant, that her time was near, that she couldn't possibly race in such a condition. But Concobar was adamant. The boast had been made before the entire assembly. Honor demanded it be proven or disproven. If Cruinniuc's wife wouldn't come, then Cruinniuc himself would be killed for making false claims about the king's horses. Messengers were sent to Cruinniuc's farm. They found Mocha and explained the situation. She begged them to wait, to allow her to give birth first before demanding she fulfill her husband's foolish boast. But the messengers were insistent. The king had commanded, and the king must be obeyed. Mocha arrived at the assembly heavy with child, her face pale with more than the exertion of travel. She stood before King Concobar and his assembled warriors, and she pleaded with them. "I am about to give birth," she said. "Surely you can see my condition. This race is not fair, not right. Wait but a few days, and I will race your horses or any champions you name." But the warriors, caught up in the excitement of the challenge and perhaps unable to imagine that a woman in any condition could actually outrun horses, refused. Some laughed. Many called for the race to begin. Not one man in all that assembly stood up to speak for Mocha, to say that what they were demanding was cruel and unjust. Mocha looked across that crowd of warriors, these men who prided themselves on honor and courage, and saw only indifference to her suffering. Her eyes, which had been those of a mortal woman, changed then, taking on a quality that made some in the crowd step back uneasily. When she spoke again, her voice carried power that made the earth itself seem to tremble. "Since not one of you will show mercy, since you care nothing for my pain, then you shall know what this pain feels like. You shall understand intimately the agony you force upon me now." Despite her condition, despite being on the verge of childbirth, Mocha raced. She ran against Concobar's horses, and impossibly, supernaturally, she won. She crossed the finish line ahead of the horses and collapsed. There, before the horrified assembly, she gave birth to twins, her screams of pain echoing across the gathering. As she lay there, having brought her children into the world under the worst circumstances imaginable, Mocha spoke her curse. For 9 times 9 generations, when Ulster faces its greatest danger, when enemies gather and war comes to your borders, all the men of Ulster will be struck down with the same pain I have endured this day. You will feel what women feel in childbirth, that agony that brings forth life. For 5 days and 4 nights you will be helpless as newborns yourselves, unable to fight, unable to stand, barely able to move. Only women, children, and those not born of Ulster will be exempt from this curse." With these words, Mocha vanished, taking her newborn twins with her, returning to whatever otherworldly realm she had come from. Cruniac, broken by what his boast had caused, lived the rest of his days in misery, his prosperity turned to ashes, his household empty once more. The curse, which became known as the Ces Noindan, the debility of the Ulster men, or sometimes the pangs of Ulster, proved all too real. Every year, when Ulster faced danger, when battles loomed or enemies threatened, the adult men of Ulster would be struck down by the most excruciating pain, as if their bodies were trying to give birth. They would curl up helpless, unable to hold weapons, unable to defend their homes and families. This curse had hung over Ulster for generations, a weakness that enemies had tried to exploit time and again. But never had it been tested as it would be tested now, when Queen Medb of Connaught, having failed to acquire the Brown Bull of Cooley through peaceful means, assembled the greatest army Ireland had ever seen. And because of this curse, because of one foolish man's boast and the cruelty of warriors who should have known better, the defence of Ulster would fall upon the shoulders of one young man, Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster, who had not been born in Ulster and so was immune to Mocha's curse. At 17 years old, with only his charioteer leg beside him, he would face an army of thousands. The stage was set for the greatest single-handed defence in all of mythology. The march to war, when diplomacy failed. Let us return now to Queen Medb in her hall at Cruachan, her mind fixed on the acquisition of Don Cúailnge, determined to equal her wealth with her husband's and restore the balance she deemed essential to her sovereignty. Unlike many rulers who might simply have marched to war at once, Medb was clever enough to try diplomacy first. After all, war was expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain in its outcome. If she could obtain the bull through negotiation, so much the better. She summoned her most silver-tongued messengers and gave them generous terms to offer Dair mac Fiachna, the Ulster chieftain who owned the Brown Bull of Cooley. The offer was magnificent: 50 prime heifers to add to Dair's herds, a stretch of rich land in Connaught equal to his holdings in Ulster, a chariot worth 21 bondmaids, and Medb's personal friendship. More than this, though the tale hints rather than states explicitly, there were suggestions of more intimate favours from the Queen herself, for Medb was known to use all weapons in her arsenal, including her beauty and charm. The messengers travelled to Cooley and presented the offer to Dair. The chieftain was initially delighted. The terms were more than fair, they were incredibly generous. For the loan of his bull for just 1 year, he would receive wealth that would make him one of the richest men in Ulster. He agreed at once, and invited Medb's messengers to stay for a feast to celebrate the arrangement. The feast was lavish, as befitted the importance of the agreement. The ale flowed freely, and Medb's messengers, far from home and celebrating what they saw as an easy success, drank more than perhaps they should have. As the night wore on and tongues grew looser, one of the messengers made a remark that would change everything. "It's lucky for Dair that he agreed," the messenger said, loud enough for nearby Ulstermen to hear. "For if he had refused, Queen Medb would have taken the bull anyway. We would have come with an army and taken it by force. But this way is better for everyone, isn't it?" The words were meant as a jest, perhaps, or as simple boasting. But they were overheard, and word travels fast in a chieftain's hall. By morning, Dair had heard exactly what Medb's messengers had said. His face grew dark with anger. The offer had not been made in good faith at all. Medb had been prepared to invade Ulster regardless of his answer. The negotiations were nothing but a polite fiction, a formality before war. When Medb's messengers came to him the next morning, expecting to receive the bull and return home triumphant, Dair's answer was cold and clear. "Tell your queen that not one hair of Don Cúailnge will cross the border into Connaught willingly. If she wants my bull, let her come and try to take it by force, as she was prepared to do all along." The messengers, now sober and beginning to realize the gravity of their drunken words, returned to Cruachan with this message. Maev's response was equally cold and clear. "Then force it shall be," she declared. "Ulster thinks itself unconquerable, its warriors the finest in Ireland. We shall see. I will have that bull, and I will have it before the winter snows." What followed was a gathering of forces unlike any Ireland had seen before. Maeve sent word throughout Connaught and beyond, calling in every favour, making new alliances, promising rewards to any who would join her cause. Kings and chieftains from all the provinces of Ireland answered her call, some drawn by the promise of plunder, others by long-standing grudges against Ulster, still others simply by the chance to test themselves against the famed Red Branch warriors. Most remarkably, Maeve gained the support of several Ulster exiles, warriors who had fled Concobar's kingdom for various reasons and now saw a chance for revenge against their former lord. Chief among these was Fergus mac Roich, once a king of Ulster himself, now living in Connaught as one of Maeve's lovers. Fergus's presence in Maeve's army requires explanation, for it adds layers of tragedy to the tale. He had been a mentor to young Cú Chulainn, had taught him much of what he knew about protecting the weak and fighting with honour. But Fergus had been exiled from Ulster because of the Deirdre affair, a tale of love and betrayal that had split Ulster's nobility into factions. King Concobar had promised safety to Deirdre and the sons of Wisliu, but had broken that promise and murdered the sons to claim Deirdre for himself. Fergus, who had given his word as guarantee of the king's safe conduct, was shamed by Concobar's treachery. He fled to Connaught with 3,000 warriors loyal to him, swearing never to fight for Ulster again. Now, leading Maeve's army as they marched toward his former homeland, Fergus must have felt the weight of fate upon him. He knew Ulster's defences, knew the land and the people. He also knew Cú Chulainn, knew what the young warrior was capable of. As the army assembled at Cruachan, as the war bands gathered from across Ireland, Fergus might have felt the first stirrings of unease. Before the army marched, Maeve sought guidance from the otherworld, as any wise ruler would before embarking on war. A prophetess came to Cruachan, a woman named Fedelm who possessed the gift of true sight. Maeve asked her a simple question: "Do you see victory for our armies?" Fedelm, her eyes distant with vision, spoke words that cast a shadow over the gathering. "I see crimson. I see red. I see a young man, small and beautiful, whose appearance marks him as extraordinary. I see him standing alone, and I see your warriors falling before him like wheat before the scythe. I see crimson. I see red." The descriptions that survive of Cú Chulainn's appearance are curious and sometimes contradictory. Some accounts describe him as dark-haired, others speak of hair with 3 colours, brown at the root, red in the middle, golden at the tips. Perhaps these variations reflect different moments or different aspects of this hero who seemed to transform in battle. What remains consistent across the tellings is that he was young, almost boyish in appearance, which made his martial prowess all the more striking. Maeve, disturbed but not deterred, asked for details. Who was this young warrior? Fedelm described him more fully, and Fergus, listening, felt his heart sink. He knew who she was describing: Cú Chulainn, his former student, the Hound of Ulster. "But surely," Maeve said, trying to reason away the prophecy, "surely all of Ulster's warriors will face us? Surely Concobar will lead his army against us." Fergus had to explain then about the curse, about the Ces Noindon that would strike down Ulster's warriors at the moment of their greatest need. He explained that if they timed their invasion carefully, Ulster's army would be helpless, unable to defend their territory. "Then who is this young man my prophetess saw?" Maeve demanded. "Cú Chulainn," Fergus answered quietly. "The Hound of Ulster. He alone will be able to face us, for he was not born in Ulster and the curse does not affect him." Maeve laughed then, a sound without much humour. "One man. One boy, for he cannot be much more than 17 years old. Surely you jest, Fergus." Surely one warrior, however skilled, cannot stand against all of Ireland's armies. But Fergus did not laugh. He remembered Cú Chulainn at 7 years old, killing Culann's hound with his bare hands. He remembered the tales that had come back from Alba, of the training with Scatchach, of the feats performed and the skills mastered. Most of all, he remembered the look in the young warrior's eyes, a certainty and determination that suggested he did not understand the meaning of the word impossible. "We should be wary of him, my queen," was all Fergus said. "Cú Chulainn is not like other warriors." But the army was gathered, the alliances forged, the momentum of war already building like a wave that cannot be stopped once it begins to crest. In late autumn, as the first cold winds began to blow from the north, as the leaves turned gold and red and fell from the trees, Queen Medb's army marched out of Cruachan toward Ulster. They numbered in the thousands, warriors from every province, chariots by the hundred, druids and champions and heroes whose names were known throughout Ireland. It was the greatest military force assembled in a generation, possibly in history. Banners rippled in the autumn wind, armor glinted in the pale sun, and the sound of their marching was like thunder rolling across the land. In Ulster, King Concobar received word of the approaching army and tried to muster his forces. But even as the messengers went out, even as warriors reached for their weapons, the curse struck. The adult men of Ulster collapsed in agony, struck down by pains they had no way to fight, reduced to helplessness at the very moment they were most needed. Only one warrior remained standing. Only one voice called out into the darkness, asking where the enemy was, how many they numbered, and where they would cross the border into Ulster. Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster, not quite 18 years old, took up his weapons and mounted his chariot. His faithful charioteer Laig, a companion since childhood, took up the reins. Together, just the two of them, they rode out to face an army of thousands. The tale of the Táin Bó Cúailnge was about to truly begin. One against thousands, the defense at the fords. The manner in which Cú Chulainn chose to fight Medb's army was dictated by both honor and strategy. He could not face thousands in open battle. That would be suicide however skilled he might be. But he could invoke an ancient right, one that even Queen Medb, for all her ruthlessness, could not easily ignore without losing the support of her allies. The right of single combat at fords. In the Ireland of that age, there was a tradition that when armies faced each other across a river or ford, either side could demand single combat before the battle proper began. This was seen as a way to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, to let the gods decide the outcome through trial by combat. More practically, it allowed skilled warriors to prove their valor and often demoralized the opposing army before fighting even started. Cú Chulainn positioned himself at the ford of Ferdia, where he knew Medb's army would have to cross to penetrate deeper into Ulster. He sent word to the approaching forces. He challenged them to single combat. One warrior at a time could face him at the ford. If they defeated him, the army could pass. But if he defeated their champion, they must stop for the day and try again the next morning with a new champion. Medb, conferring with her advisors, couldn't refuse without looking cowardly before all of Ireland. She had champions in plenty, warriors who had never been defeated. Surely one of them could handle this arrogant young Ulsterman. She accepted the challenge. What followed was a campaign unlike any other in Irish mythology, a guerrilla war mixed with formal combat that would last for months. By day, Cú Chulainn faced champion after champion at the ford. By night, he harassed the army's camps, striking from darkness with hit-and-run tactics that kept them constantly on edge. The first champions fell easily. Cú Chulainn cut through them with almost contemptuous efficiency. These were skilled warriors, men who had won fame in battles across Ireland. But against the Hound of Ulster they seemed like children playing with wooden swords. His speed was incredible, his strength seemed superhuman, and his technique was beyond anything most warriors had ever encountered. Maeve grew frustrated and began offering rewards to any who would face Cú Chulainn. Gold, land, the hand of her daughter Fiannavar in marriage, anything to encourage her champions to try. But news of the defeats spread through the camp. Warriors who had been eager for glory began to think twice about facing this Ulster demon. It was during this period that Cú Chulainn's battle frenzy, his Riastrad, became the stuff of nightmare tales that would spread throughout the army. When pushed hard enough, when the fight demanded it, something would come over the hound. His body would transform in ways that the ancient texts describe in almost supernatural terms. The descriptions of his Riastrad that have come down to us are vivid and dramatic, perhaps poetically exaggerated to convey the sheer terror he inspired, or perhaps reflecting something genuinely otherworldly about his divine heritage. The accounts speak of physical transformations that seem impossible, one eye bulging huge and red while the other sinks deep, hair standing on end with each strand tipped with blood or light, muscles writhing beneath the skin, the jaw seeming to unhinge, a fountain of dark blood erupting from his skull. The texts describe heat radiating from him like a forge, so intense it could scorch the ground and force warriors back. Whether we understand these descriptions as literal truth or as the bardic tradition's way of expressing the absolute fury and supernatural power of his fighting, the effect on Maeve's army was undeniable. Warriors began to fear even approaching the ford where Cú Chulainn waited. In this state, the tales tell us, he could not distinguish friend from foe, attacking anyone nearby with berserker fury. Special techniques were needed to calm him afterward. The stories speak of placing him in barrels of cold water in succession until the heat of his battle rage had cooled enough for recognition to return to his eyes. During this time, Cú Chulainn was not entirely alone. The Morrigan, the great goddess of war and fate, took an interest in him. She appeared to him in various forms, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, always pursuing her own inscrutable purposes. Once she came as a beautiful young woman, offering her love and assistance if he would have her. Cú Chulainn, focused entirely on his defense of Ulster, refused her without even recognizing her divine nature. The Morrigan, insulted by this rejection, transformed into an eel and tripped him during combat with an enemy champion. Then she became a wolf, stampeding cattle across the ford to disrupt his fighting. Finally, she became a heifer leading the stampede. In each form, Cú Chulainn managed to wound her even while fighting his primary opponent, not realizing he was battling a goddess. Later, she appeared to him as an old woman milking a cow, wounded in ways that corresponded to the injuries he had inflicted on her animal forms. She offered him milk, and with each drink, he blessed her. These blessings healed her wounds. When he realized he had been healing the Morrigan, he regretted not knowing her true identity sooner. On another occasion, when Cú Chulainn was badly wounded after a particularly brutal combat, his divine father Luff appeared to him. The god put him into a healing sleep for 3 days while using supernatural medicine on his wounds. While Cú Chulainn slept, the boys of Ulster's youth corps, not affected by the curse, came to his aid and fought in his place. All of them were killed, a tragedy that weighed heavily on Cú Chulainn's heart when he woke. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The autumn deepened into winter. Maeve's army was stuck at the border of Ulster, unable to advance past the one young warrior who held the ford. Supply lines grew stretched. Warriors from the allied provinces began to grumble about the length of the campaign. Some questioned why they were even there, risking their lives for Connaught's queen and her pride. Maeve tried negotiation, sending messages offering Cú Chulainn great rewards if he would step aside. She offered him gold, land, position in her own army. Each offer he refused. His loyalty was to Ulster, to King Concobar, to the people who lay helpless under Mocha's curse. He would not be bought. Then Maeve tried deceit and treachery. She sent druids and sorcerers to curse him, sent champions who fought without honor, tried ambushes and surprise attacks. Nothing worked. Cú Chulainn seemed to anticipate every trick, counter every magical assault, defeat every champion no matter how they approached the combat. As winter settled in cold and hard, as Cú Chulainn's body accumulated wounds that even his divine heritage struggled to heal fully, Maeve grew desperate. She needed someone who could match the Hound in skill and strength. She needed a champion who had trained as he had trained, who knew techniques that could counter his own. She needed his friend, his foster brother, the one man who might be able to defeat him. She needed Ferdia. The combat that broke hearts. Ferdia at the ford. Ferdia Mac Domain stood in his tent in Maeve's camp, knowing that messengers from the Queen were on their way to him, knowing what they would ask, and dreading it with every fibre of his being. He had heard the reports from the ford, had listened to warriors describe how Cú Chulainn fought, and with each story, his heart grew heavier. They had been boys together in Scatchacus training. They had shared everything: lessons, meals, beds, dreams, fears. They had sworn oaths of brotherhood, the kind of bonds that were supposed to be unbreakable. Ferdia had watched Cú Chulainn grow from a talented youth into a peerless warrior. He knew his friend's techniques as well as he knew his own. And he knew, with cold certainty, that if they fought, one of them would die. When Maeve's first messenger arrived, Ferdia sent him away without even letting him speak. He knew what the offer would be: fight Cú Chulainn, and receive great rewards. He wanted no part of it. But Maeve had not become queen by accepting refusal. She sent more messengers with greater offers. Ferdia continued to refuse. She threatened him then, saying she would have her poets compose satires about him, songs that would proclaim him a coward, that would stain his honor and his family's name for generations. Even this, though it struck close to home, Ferdia resisted. Finally, Maeve changed tactics. She invited Ferdia to a feast, sending her daughter Fiannavar to personally deliver the invitation. Ferdia came, intending to tell the Queen to her face that he would never fight his foster brother. But when he arrived, he found a feast prepared that would have tempted a saint. The finest food, the best mead and ale, music that stirred the soul. And throughout the night, Fiannavar sat beside him, her beauty devastating, her attention focused entirely on him. She touched his hand, laughed at his words, looked at him with eyes that promised everything a warrior could want. As the evening wore on and the drink flowed, Maeve spoke to Ferdia of all she would give him if he defeated Cú Chulainn. Land and gold were mentioned, but also Fiannavar's hand in marriage. The young woman herself leaned close and whispered that she would be honored to be his wife, that she had never met a warrior as magnificent as him. The drink, the flattery, the beautiful woman's attention, all of it was working on Ferdia's defenses. But still he held back. He knew what Maeve was doing, how she was manipulating him. Even drunk and charmed, he remembered his oath to Cú Chulainn. Then Maeve, seeing his continued resistance, played her final card. "Of course," she said, as if it were an afterthought. "Cú Chulainn himself has said he welcomes the opportunity to fight you. He's been boasting about it, actually. He claims he was always the better warrior when you trained together, and he's eager to prove it before all of Ireland. He said defeating you would not even be counted among his great victories because you were never truly a match for him." It was a lie, of course. A complete fabrication. But spoken with confidence after a night of drinking, seasoned with Fiannavar's admiring gaze and the accumulated frustration of knowing his foster brother was covering himself in glory while Ferdia sat idle in the camp, it struck home. Ferdia's face flushed with anger and pride. "He said that? Cú Chulainn said I was never a match for him." Maeve nodded solemnly, her face a perfect mask of sympathetic outrage. "I'm afraid so. I wouldn't have mentioned it, but since you asked." Ferdia stood then, swaying slightly, his decision made in anger and alcohol. "I'll fight him. Tomorrow at the ford. and we'll see who was the better warrior at Scatchacus school. Maeve smiled then, a smile of triumph she didn't bother to hide. She had her champion. That night, Fergus mac Roich, who had been at the feast and heard Ferdiad's agreement, took it upon himself to ride to where Cú Chulainn camped near the ford. He warned the young warrior that his foster brother would be coming to face him the next day. Cú Chulainn's reaction was not what Fergus expected. There was no bravado, no confidence in easy victory. Instead, the Hound of Ulster looked stricken, as if Fergus had stabbed him through the heart. "Ferdiad," he said quietly. "Ferdiad has agreed to fight me." "Maeve has manipulated him," Fergus tried to explain. "She's lied to him, told him you've been insulting him. I thought you should know." That night, neither Ferdiad nor Cú Chulainn slept well. Both men lay awake, remembering their time together, thinking of the oaths they'd sworn, wondering how it had come to this. In some versions of the tale, they both wept before dawn came. When morning arrived, cold and grey, Ferdiad came to the ford. He was dressed in his finest armour, prepared for battle in ways that made clear he knew this would be no ordinary combat. His chariot was polished and ready, his charioteer grim-faced. But what set Ferdiad apart from other warriors was his renowned invulnerability, described in some tellings as a horn-like skin, impervious to ordinary weapons. This protection, whether a natural quality he was born with or something acquired through otherworldly means, made his skin resistant to normal blades and spears. Swords would not easily cut it, spears would not readily pierce it. It made him nearly invulnerable, a formidable defense against most warriors' techniques. But Cú Chulainn had the gay Bulgar. They met at the ford as the sun was rising, two young men who had loved each other as brothers, now forced by fate and politics and manipulation to face each other in combat to the death. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the water. "Cool," Ferdiad called out, using the nickname only close friends could use. "Is it really true what Maeve said? That you claimed I was never a match for you?" Cú Chulainn's face showed honest pain. "It's a lie, Ferdiad. Whatever she told you, it's a lie. You know I would never say such things about you. We're brothers." Ferdiad wanted to believe him. You could see it in his face. But pride and drink and Maeve's honey-sweet words had done their work. "Then why do you fight for Ulster that abandoned so many? Why not come to Connaught, join us, and we could fight side by side again?" "Because it's my home," Cú Chulainn answered simply. "Because they need me. Because King Concobar gave me my place. I can't abandon them now." "Then we have nothing more to say," Ferdiad replied, and prepared for combat. What followed was several days of fighting that became legend even among the tales of the Táin. Some tellings say 3 days, others speak of 4 or even 5, but all agree on the terrible intensity of their combat. They fought with every weapon type, showcasing their complete mastery of martial arts. The first day, they used light swords and casting spears, weapons that tested speed and accuracy. Neither could gain a clear advantage. They were too evenly matched, too familiar with each other's techniques. When night fell, they stopped fighting and came together. Old habits from their training days reasserted themselves. They embraced, kissed each other's cheeks in the manner of close friends. Each attended the other's wounds, sharing healing herbs and salves. They sent food back and forth between their camps and even spent the night side by side, falling asleep back to back as they had done countless times under Scatchacus' roof. But when dawn came, they were enemies again. The second day, they fought with long spears and heavy swords, weapons of power that could cleave through armor. The combat was fiercer, their wounds more serious. Blood stained the ford's waters red. Yet still, neither could gain a decisive advantage. When night fell again, they tended each other's injuries, shared food, and slept near each other, though the easy camaraderie of the first night was strained. On the final day of their combat, they fought with every weapon and technique they possessed, holding nothing back. They threw javelins with such force they could split trees. They used the special techniques Scatchuk had taught them. Maneuvers with names like the Thunder Feet and the Blade Feet. The ford became a storm of violence, water and blood mixing until it was impossible to tell them apart. As the day wore on, both warriors were bleeding from multiple wounds, exhausted beyond anything they had experienced before. But Cú Chulainn's battle frenzy began to take hold. The Riastrad came upon him, and he transformed, becoming something more than human, something terrifying. Ferdia fell back before this onslaught, his horn skin protecting him from the worst of the attacks but unable to prevent all damage. He saw his opening then and took it. His sword found its way past Cú Chulainn's defenses and struck him in the chest, a blow that would have killed a normal man. Cú Chulainn staggered back, blood pouring from the wound. The Riastrad faded as pain brought him back to himself. He was losing, he realized. Ferdia was about to kill him. "Leg," he called to his charioteer. "The gay Bulgar. Give me the gay Bulgar." His faithful charioteer had been standing ready with the terrible weapon. He floated it down the stream to where Cú Chulainn could reach it. The Hound of Ulster caught it with his foot, the way Scatchuk had taught him, the technique that only he knew. Ferdia saw the spear and knew what it meant. He tried to dodge, tried to bring his shield down to block it. But the gay Bulgar was already in motion, kicked from Cú Chulainn's foot with perfect technique and desperate strength. The spear entered Ferdia's body below his protective skin, finding that one vulnerable spot. The moment it penetrated, the weapon's terrible nature manifested, barbs spreading through him, tearing through his body from within. Ferdia stood for a moment, a look of surprise on his face, and then he fell forward into the ford's water. Cú Chulainn caught him as he fell, cradling his foster brother in his arms. He carried Ferdia to the Ulster side of the ford, weeping openly, speaking words of grief that would be remembered forever. "O Ferdia, you were betrayed. Our friendship was real, but Maev's words were lies. She sent you to your death for her pride and her bull. Oh my brother, my foster brother, why did it have to be this way?" Ferdia, dying, managed to speak his final words. "It's not your fault, Cú. We were both trapped by fate and the games of queens. I don't blame you. I never could." With those words, Ferdia MacDemain died in his foster brother's arms. Leg came forward and cut the gay Bulgar from Ferdia's body, the only way to retrieve the terrible weapon. The sight of it, covered in his friend's blood, almost broke Cú Chulainn. He stayed by Ferdia's body throughout the night, keeping vigil as was proper for fallen comrades. He spoke poems of lamentation, recounting their time together, the oaths they'd sworn, the brotherhood they'd shared. The armies on both sides of the ford could hear him, and many warriors wept to hear such grief in the hound's voice. When dawn came, Cú Chulainn was still holding his friend's body. Maev's army, having witnessed this combat and its cost, did not send another champion that day. They gave both warriors respect, though Maeve herself must have been furious at the delay. Eventually, Ferdia's people from Connaught came to claim his body, and Cú Chulainn let them take it for proper burial. He watched them carry his foster brother away, and then he collapsed from his own wounds. For the first time since the campaign began, he was too injured to continue fighting immediately. While he lay recovering, Maeve saw her opportunity. With no champion to stop them, she pushed her forces deeper into Ulster. Druids and warriors spread across the countryside, searching for the Brown Bull of Cooley. And despite all of Cú Chulainn's efforts, despite the months of defense and the terrible price paid, they found Dom Cúailnge and began driving the great bull back toward Connaught. It seemed that Queen Medb would have her victory after all. But she had not counted on the curse being temporary. The CES Noindon, though debilitating, did not last forever. And as Maev's forces celebrated their capture of the bull, as they began the journey back to Connaught, the men of Ulster began to wake. The final battle of the Táin Bó Cúailnge was about to begin. The rising of the Red Branch, Ulster's army awakes. The debility that had held Ulster's warriors in its grip for months was finally releasing its hold. One by one, the men began to stir. At first, it was a tentative movement, a finger curling, an eyelid fluttering. Then came gasps as lungs filled with air after what felt like drowning. Warriors who had lain helpless, curled in fetal positions, racked with pain they couldn't fight, gradually found themselves able to move, able to stand, able to reach for weapons that had been hanging unused on walls for far too long. King Concobar mac Nessa was among the first to fully recover. He stood in the great hall of Emain Mocha, his face dark with rage as messengers brought reports of what had happened while his warriors lay helpless. His kingdom had been invaded. His people had been terrorized. His cattle had been stolen. And Medb's armies were even now preparing to retreat back to Connaught, taking the Brown Bull with them. The king's voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of oath and prophecy both. As the sky is above us and the earth beneath us, as certain as the sun rises in the east, I swear this, every cow will return to its stall. Every prisoner will return to their home. And Connaught will pay for this invasion with blood and grief. Throughout Ulster, the same scene was repeating. Warriors were recovering, rage building in their hearts. They had been forced to lie helpless while one young man fought for all of them. They had heard the reports of Cú Chulainn's battles, of the champions he'd defeated, of the terrible price paid when Ferdia fell at the ford. Shame mixed with anger, creating a fury that demanded outlet. The army of Ulster mustered with a speed that surprised even those calling them together. Warriors who hours before had been unable to stand now marched in formation, eager to meet their enemies in battle. Chariots were prepared, weapons sharpened, armor donned. The Red Branch warriors, the elite force of Ulster, gathered for what would be one of the greatest battles in Irish history. Meanwhile, Cú Chulainn lay recovering from his wounds. The combat with Ferdia had taken a terrible toll. His body was a mass of cuts and bruises, many wounds still seeping blood despite the healer's best efforts. He was exhausted beyond anything he'd experienced before, physically and emotionally drained by months of constant fighting and the grief of killing his foster brother. When word reached him that Ulster's army was mustering, that the curse had finally lifted, Cú Chulainn tried to rise and join them. But his body betrayed him. He managed to stand, managed even to take a few steps, but then collapsed. His charioteer leg and the healers attending him begged him to rest, to let Ulster's fresh warriors handle the battle while he recovered. For the first time in months, Cú Chulainn agreed to stay behind. He had done everything he could. Now it was time for others to fight for Ulster. The two armies met on the plain of Muirtham, a broad expanse of land that could accommodate the thousands of warriors gathered there. On one side stood the forces of Connaught and her allies, weary from months of campaigning but still formidable. On the other side, Ulster's warriors, fresh and furious, ready to exact vengeance for the invasion of their homeland. The battle began at dawn, both sides surging forward with war cries that could be heard for miles. The clash when they met was like thunder, the sound of thousands of weapons striking shields and armor echoing across the plain. This was not the elegant single combat of the ford. This was war in its most brutal form, chaos and blood and death dealt out by the hundreds. At first, Connaught seemed to hold its own. Fergus mac Roich, leading part of their forces, fought with the fury of a man trying to prove something, perhaps to himself. His great sword, which was said to be as tall as a man and which no shield could withstand, carved through Ulster's ranks. Warriors fell before him, and it seemed he might turn the tide single-handedly. Then Fergus found himself facing King Concobar. Here was the man who had betrayed his oath, who had murdered the sons of Wisliu and driven Fergus into exile. All Fergus's rage and grief found focus in this moment. He raised his mighty sword, prepared to cleave Concobar in two and exact his revenge at last. But Concobar's son, Cormac Condominium Longers, Fergus's own foster son, threw himself between them. "Father," he cried, using the title of fosterage rather than blood, "would you truly kill your former king? Would you stain your honor with such a blow?" Fergus froze, his sword raised but not falling. He looked at Cormac, this young man he had helped raise, and then at Concobar, his face twisted with conflicting emotions. He couldn't strike down his foster son, but neither could he simply walk away from this confrontation. In his rage and frustration, Fergus turned his sword aside and struck at the hills nearby instead. 3 times his blade fell, and 3 times it cleaved the tops off hills, leaving them flat forever after as monuments to his fury. Then he withdrew from the battle, pulling his warriors back with him. This was the turning point. With Fergus gone, Connaught's forces lost one of their strongest leaders. The tide began to turn against them. Back at the place where he lay recovering, Cú Chulainn heard the sounds of battle. He could distinguish the war cries of Ulster from those of Connaught. He could hear the clash of weapons and the screams of dying men. And he could bear it no longer. Despite his wounds, despite the healer's protests, Cú Chulainn forced himself to his feet. He called for his chariot, called for his weapons. Laig, seeing the determination in his eyes, knew better than to refuse. Together they prepared for battle one final time. When Cú Chulainn's chariot rolled onto the field of battle, both armies seemed to pause for a moment. The Hound of Ulster, who had held the ford alone for months, who had faced champion after champion, who had paid such a terrible price, had come to join the final confrontation. The effect on Ulster's warriors was electric. They surged forward with renewed vigor, inspired by their champion's presence. Connaught's forces, already struggling, began to break and run. Cú Chulainn drove his chariot through the battle, searching. He was looking for one person in particular, Fergus Mac Roich, his former teacher, the man who had fled Ulster and now fought for Connaught. When he found him, Cú Chulainn called out across the battlefield, "Fergus, remember your promise. You swore to me at the ford that if I yielded to you, you would yield to me when I asked. I'm asking now. Withdraw from this battle and take your men with you." Fergus heard him and remembered. During the months of combat at the ford, there had been a day when Fergus himself came to fight Cú Chulainn. The young warrior, rather than fighting his former teacher to the death, had offered to yield on the condition that Fergus would return the favor when called upon. Fergus had agreed, and Cú Chulainn had stepped aside, allowing Fergus to defeat him without actual combat. Now, that promise came due. Fergus could have fought. He could have argued that circumstances had changed. But he was, above all else, a man of honor. He had given his word, and his word meant something even in the chaos of battle. "I yield to you, Cú Chulainn." Fergus called back, "Come, warriors of Ulster in exile. We're leaving this field." With Fergus went 3,000 warriors who followed him. This massive withdrawal broke Connaught's battle lines entirely. What had been a hard-fought battle became a rout. Medb's remaining forces broke and ran, streaming back toward Connaught in disorder. Medb herself tried to rally her warriors, tried to organize a fighting retreat. But it was hopeless. Ulster's fury was unleashed, and they pursued the invaders relentlessly. In the chaos of the retreat, Cú Chulainn came upon Medb herself, separated from her guards. The tale tells us she was, in that moment, experiencing her monthly bleeding, a detail preserved in the ancient texts that speaks to the rawness and honesty of these stories. By the laws and customs of the time, it would have been dishonorable to strike down a woman in this vulnerable condition. Cú Chulainn, despite everything Medb had done, despite the months of war and the death of Ferdia, lowered his weapon. "Go," he said to the queen. "Run back to Connaught. But know that you've lost. Your invasion has failed, and Ulster stands." Medb met his eyes, and perhaps in that moment, There was some mutual respect between these two champions, enemies though they were. She withdrew, and Cú Chulainn even protected her retreat, ensuring that Ulster's warriors didn't catch and kill her in their pursuit. The armies of Connaught fled back across the border, leaving behind them a trail of dead and wounded. Ulster's warriors pursued them to the borders of the kingdom and then, finally, stopped. The battle was over. The invasion had been repelled. But Maeve had succeeded in one thing. She had captured the Brown Bull of Cooley. Even as her armies fled in disarray, Dún Cúailnge was being driven toward Connaught. After all the bloodshed, all the sacrifice, all the months of warfare, the Queen would have her prize. Or would she? When bulls collide, the final tragedy. The Brown Bull of Cooley, Dún Cúailnge, was brought into Connaught amid whatever remained of Maeve's triumph. Despite the defeat of her armies, despite the humiliation of the retreat, she had the bull. The great creature was led to the pastures of Cruachan, where Ailill's white bull, Fin Benak, already grazed. News spread quickly through Connaught that the two legendary bulls would finally meet. People gathered from all around to witness what promised to be a spectacle unlike any they had seen. These were no ordinary animals, after all. These were creatures of magic, once mortal beings who had fought through countless transformations, whose rivalry had sparked a war that had cost thousands of lives. Dún Cúailnge, the Brown Bull, was magnificent to behold. His coat was deep brown that shimmered almost red in certain lights, his frame massive and powerful from years of running wild in Ulster's hills. His horns were like spears, his eyes intelligent and fierce. He bellowed when he saw where he had been brought, and the sound carried for miles, a roar of rage and challenge that made the ground seem to tremble. In the pastures of Cruachan, Fin Benak, the white-horned one, heard that bellow. His own response was immediate. This bull, white as new snow except for his curving horns, was every bit as magnificent as his rival. He had spent years as Ailill's prized possession, treated like royalty, but there was wildness in him still, an ancient fury that went back to when he had been Rutch the swineherd. The two bulls saw each other across the field. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Everyone watching held their breath. Then, as if answering a signal only they could hear, both bulls charged. They met with an impact that echoed like a thunderclap. Horns locked, hooves tore at the earth, massive bodies strained against each other. This was no quick combat. This was a battle that would last through the day and into the night, a contest of strength and will that mirrored the human war that had been fought to bring them together. A man named Bricriu was chosen to judge the fight. He was known for his sharp tongue and his inability to favor anyone, treating friend and foe with equal harsh judgment. He took his position to watch the combat, though it soon became clear that judging this battle was a dangerous occupation. The bulls gored each other with their horns, drawing blood that stained the ground. They pushed and shoved, each trying to gain advantage. When they separated to charge again, the earth shook with their impact. Warriors watching from the sides shouted encouragement, though to which bull they cheered probably changed with the momentum of the fight. As day turned to night, the combat grew more desperate, more brutal. Both bulls were bleeding from multiple wounds, their bellowing now mixed with sounds of pain as well as rage. They no longer fought with strategy or skill, only with the instinct to destroy the ancient enemy they had struggled against through so many lifetimes. In the darkness, still locked in combat, they trampled poor Bricriu, who was caught between them. The judge of their battle became its first casualty, gored and crushed beneath their hooves. But the bulls didn't even notice. They were beyond noticing anything except each other. When dawn came, the people who had gathered to watch stirred from where they had dozed or kept vigil through the night. At first, they couldn't see the bulls clearly in the early light. Then, as the sun rose higher, they made out a shape moving toward them from where the battle had been fought. It was Dún Cúailnge, the Brown Bull of Cooley. He walked slowly, wearily, his head low. and hanging from his horns were the mangled remains of Fin Benak, the white-horned one. The brown bull had won, but the cost of victory was written in every painful step he took. Dom Cúailnge didn't stop at Cruachan. He turned toward the east, toward Ulster, toward home. For 2 days he walked, and as he went, pieces of Fin Benak's body fell from his horns, scattering across Ireland. The tradition tells us that each place where a piece fell was given a name to commemorate it. These etiological tales, stories that explain the origins of place names, are common in Irish mythology. Fields and streams across Ireland would carry names like the liver of the white bull or the shoulder of Fin Benak, connecting the landscape itself to this ancient story. Finally, Dom Cúailnge reached the borders of Ulster, came to the hills of Cooley where he had lived before being taken. He stood there for a moment, looking out over the familiar landscape, perhaps recognizing home. Then, his heart finally giving out from the wounds he had sustained, the great brown bull collapsed and died. The war had been fought for possession of this bull. Months of combat, thousands of lives lost, a hero forced to kill his foster brother, all of it for the sake of Queen Medb's pride and her desire to equal her husband's wealth. And in the end, both bulls were dead, making the entire conflict meaningless. The prize that had sparked the war was destroyed by the war itself. When news of the bull's death reached both Ulster and Connaught, there must have been a moment of realization, a terrible understanding of the waste and futility of it all. Medb gained nothing. Ailill lost his prized bull. Ulster was scarred by invasion. Connaught suffered a humiliating defeat. And the list of the dead stretched long on both sides. In the aftermath, as both kingdoms counted their losses and tended to their wounded, Ailill and Medb made peace with King Conchobar and Ulster. A treaty was negotiated, terms agreed upon. For 7 years, they swore, there would be no warfare between Connaught and Ulster. 7 years of peace to rebuild, to heal, to recover from the madness that had consumed them. The peace held, more or less. But the Táin Bó Cúailnge left scars that never fully healed, and its consequences would echo through the Ulster cycle's subsequent tales, leading eventually to darker stories and tragic ends. The legacy of the Hound, reflections on heroism and sacrifice. As we come to the end of this epic tale, as the echo of that ancient battle fades into the mists of time, we're left with questions that resonate across the centuries. What does the Táin Bó Cúailnge truly tell us? What truths about humanity, about heroism, about the price of honor and the futility of pride, are woven into this ancient narrative? At its heart, the Táin is a story about the cost of war. It begins with something almost laughably petty, a quarrel between spouses about who owns more wealth. From this small seed of pride and competition grows a conflict that consumes thousands of lives. The bulls themselves, magnificent as they are ultimately just animals. They don't care about sovereignty or wealth or who owns them. The war fought over them is purely a human construction, driven by human vanity and ambition. Queen Medb is a fascinating figure in this regard. She's not a simple villain, not a one-dimensional antagonist. She's a sovereign ruler, powerful and capable, refusing to be considered lesser than her husband in any regard. In many ways, she's admirable. She leads armies personally, fights when needed, and never backs down. But her pride leads to catastrophic decisions, her manipulation of Ferdia is cruel, and her inability to accept that sometimes the cost outweighs the prize makes her tragic rather than simply villainous. Cú Chulainn, for his part, embodies a particular kind of heroism that Irish mythology celebrates: absolute dedication to duty, willingness to stand alone against impossible odds, loyalty that cannot be bought or broken. He's not without flaws. His battle frenzy is genuinely terrifying, and there's a certain ruthlessness to some of his actions. But he stands as an example of what a hero should be. Someone who fights not for glory or reward, but because someone must, because people need protection, because it's the right thing to do. The combat between Cú Chulainn and Ferdia stands as perhaps the most tragic element of the entire tale. These are foster brothers, men who love each other, forced into conflict by manipulation and politics. Neither wants to fight, but both are trapped by honor, by pride, by the expectations of their respective sides. Their combat is heartbreaking precisely because we know how easily it could have been avoided if not for Maev's lies and Ferdiad's wounded pride. This aspect of the tale speaks to something universal about war, how easily friendships can be destroyed, how politics and propaganda can turn brothers into enemies, how the powerful manipulate the willing to fight and die for causes that may not deserve such sacrifice. The curse of Mocha adds another layer of meaning. Here is a goddess, pregnant and in need of help, who receives only cruelty from those watching. Her curse is perfectly fitting. Let those who showed no mercy to a woman in labor experience that labor themselves. The fact that this curse leaves Ulster vulnerable, that it allows Maev's invasion to proceed, suggests that cruelty has consequences, that failure to show mercy when mercy is needed can come back to haunt an entire people. There's something profoundly Irish about how the tale ends. Not with clear victory or defeat, but with exhaustion and waste. Both bulls die, making the entire war pointless. A peace is made, but only after terrible loss on both sides. It's not the clean, simple ending of good triumphing over evil. It's messy and sad and honest about the real cost of conflict. The tale has endured for good reason. It's been told and retold, written and rewritten, adapted and reimagined for well over 1,000 years. Modern Irish writers from William Butler Yeats to Seamus Heaney have drawn on its themes and characters. Artists have illustrated its scenes. Musicians have composed works inspired by its drama. The Táin Bó Cúailnge stands as Ireland's national epic, as important to Irish culture as the Iliad is to Greek or the Epic of Gilgamesh to Mesopotamian. It preserves aspects of what scholars believe may reflect ancient Celtic society. The importance of cattle, the practice of single combat, the role of druids and prophets, the belief in shape-shifting and otherworldly intervention. While we cannot say with certainty how much of the tale reflects actual historical practice versus literary invention, these elements give us glimpses into the values and worldview of early Ireland. But more than just historical preservation, the tale remains relevant because its themes are timeless. We still see leaders whose pride leads to conflict. We still see young people sent to fight wars that serve the powerful more than the people. We still see friendships destroyed by politics, communities torn apart by conflicts that seem, in hindsight, tragically avoidable. The specific circumstances change. We no longer fight over bulls, but the human patterns remain the same. Cú Chulainn's choice, made in his youth when Scatchach prophesied his future, remains one that echoes through literature. Fame or long life, glory or comfort, a short bright existence or a long quiet one. It's a choice that speaks to something fundamental about how we value our time on earth. Is it better to burn brightly and briefly, leaving a mark that endures long after you're gone? Or to live long and peacefully, perhaps forgotten by history but present for all the small joys and sorrows that make up a human life? The tale doesn't presume to answer these questions for us. It simply presents them, lets us watch the consequences play out, and trusts us to draw our own conclusions. A journey's end. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our journey through the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley. We've walked with Cú Chulainn through months of lonely defense, felt his grief when forced to kill Ferdiad, witnessed Queen Medb's pride and ambition, watched as two magical bulls fought their final battle after lifetimes of rivalry. The sun has fully risen now, I imagine, or perhaps you've traveled through this tale into another night, letting the words carry you through hours that passed unnoticed. The ancient world we visited is long gone. The fords where Cú Chulainn stood are crossed by bridges now. The plains where armies clashed are dotted with towns and roads. The bulls, of course, turned to dust millennia ago. But the stories remain. They are passed down from generation to generation, changing slightly with each telling but maintaining their essential truth. They remind us of who we are, where we came from, and what values we choose to honor or reject. They connect us to ancestors who sat around fires in the cold Irish nights and told these same tales, finding in them entertainment, instruction, and meaning. The Hound of Ulster still stands at that ford in our imaginations, young and fierce and utterly committed to defending what he loves. Queen Medb still rides out from Cruachan at the head of her armies, proud and powerful and tragic. Ferdia still faces his foster brother across the water, two young men caught in a war neither wanted. And the Brown Bull and the White-Horned Bull still clash in that eternal combat, ancient rivals whose hatred outlasted death itself and transformation beyond counting. These figures live on not as historical facts but as mythological truths, as representatives of aspects of human nature that remain constant despite all the changes of civilization and technology. They remind us that heroism is real, that sacrifice matters, that pride can destroy, that love and duty can conflict, and that sometimes even victories are hollow. If you've enjoyed this journey through Irish mythology, if these ancient tales have sparked your imagination or touched your heart, I hope you'll continue to explore the rich tradition of Celtic folklore. There are so many more stories to tell, of the Tuatha de Danann and their magical treasures, of Fionn McCool and the Fianna, of the voyages to otherworldly islands, of tragic love affairs and heroic quests. But for now, let these images rest in your mind. The young warrior standing alone at the ford, the prophetess seeing crimson visions, the two foster brothers embracing after a day of trying to kill each other, the great bulls meeting in that final combat, the cost of pride measured in lives lost and hearts broken. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Táin. If you enjoyed this exploration of Irish mythology, please consider subscribing to Emerald Dreams for more tales from the Celtic tradition. Leave a like if this story moved you, and share it with anyone who might appreciate a glimpse into the ancient heroic world of Ireland. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with the magic of old Ireland, may you find courage when you need it, and may you remember that the greatest heroes are often those who stand alone not for glory but for love and duty. Sleep well, dear wanderers. The stories will be here when you wake.